very quick intro from me. I am Sarah Pawson. I'm one of the directors at the Fruition Group, and Fruition as a business is, Fruition IT is one of our businesses, and we are a technology recruitment organisation that provides services to organisation across Yorkshire and beyond, helping some brilliant organisations build diverse technology teams. And I also run Fruition Consulting, which is a technology delivery partner, also working with similar organisations. So along with our expert panel this morning, who I will introduce shortly, we will be offering some practical tips and real life experiences on how organisations can tackle the challenge of recruitment and retention across underrepresented groups. We'll also be highlighting how to ensure that mental health and illness can be supported in the workplace. And I think really we're all in agreement that there is a huge challenge with a technology skills gap, and feel very much that goes hand in hand with the diversity gap that we're experiencing in our sector. So without, I guess, me waffling on anymore, if I could introduce, first of all, the panel of speakers, and I'll come to each of you, and just if you could give a very quick intro to who you are and your background and anything that you think might be interesting and relevant for our delegates this morning. So I'll come to you first, Holly.
Oh no, I didn't get time to think of an interesting fact. Morning everyone, my name's Holly Straker, and I am the Inclusion, Wellbeing and Community Senior Manager at Sky Betting and Gaming, and I've been there for about 4 years.
Excellent, thanks Holly. Joanne, you're in my top right, so over to you.
Yes, good morning everybody, thank you Sarah. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I describe myself as an inclusion and belonging specialist. I work with organisations throughout the UK, Europe and elsewhere to create a positive people experience, be that in the recruitment talent acquisition process, accessibility, fairness, equity within that, working with HR teams around the people and staff experience, and also working with OD and D&I teams such as Holly at Sky Bet to promote great practices to help their teams thrive. I do a lot of keynote speaking, panels, training, consulting, and I'm more than happy for you to connect with me on LinkedIn afterwards.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Harry, over to you.
Good morning all, and thank you Sarah for the introduction as well. I'm Harry Bliss, CEO and co-founder of Champion Health, and our vision is to make wellbeing more inclusive, accessible and engaging. Now, over 3 years ago, I had a mentor, and he was one of the youngest directors on the FTSE 100. His career had gone from strength to strength, and he lived with positive mental health throughout his life. And following a 2-week bout of workplace stress, he tragically ended up taking his own life. And that's the fire in my belly when it comes to mental health and well-being. It's making sure that we can empower individuals whilst they're well and whilst they're thriving. But how do we get to people when they're struggling and get them into the right support faster and earlier than before, along with breaking the stigma? So that's everything that I'm going to discuss with you today.
Thank you, Harry. And last but not least, Anne-Marie, thanks for joining us.
Hi, hello there. I'm Anne-Marie Orange, and I'm the CIO for TransUnion Europe, which is it's core a credit reference agency, but we use data and insights to support businesses. I've been in IT in different roles for over 25 years. Probably wouldn't go further than that because it gives your age away, so we'll just leave it at over 25 years. In lots of different sectors, but yeah, latterly in my career now in the financial services sector. So my interest in this panel is TransUnion is a little bit of an anomaly in that thankfully it does have a very diverse exec. So 50% of the exec are women, which is great and quite unusual, and is very diverse in terms of ethnicity as well. So I think for me, that's why I'm interested in this panel.
Excellent, thank you. So I just thought I'd pull some stats together yesterday just to kind of bring to life the kind of stark reality of D&I in the tech sector. And hopefully this might provoke a bit of discussion on the back of this, but just to kind of break it down. So 19% of the tech sector are made up of females. Only 13% of females operate at IT director level. So it's good to see that TransUnion are bucking the trend there, Anne-Marie. 18% are from an ethnic minority, and only 9% of those of ethnic minority operate at director level. 22% are over 50 years old. 11%, only 11% have disabilities. 26%, and this is quite shocking, of the LGBTQ plus community employees remain totally closeted at work. And 95% of workers across the UK, in some way, shape or form, whether directly or indirectly, will have been touched by a mental health challenge in the workplace. So obviously with the need, I guess, for greater diversity and inclusion being amplified more than ever, it'd be great to talk about how organisations can make that cultural shift and what role really the technology sector has to play to make this happen. So I'm going to come on to the panel now, and if we could start at the beginning really and just highlight a couple of ideas from you all. What are the main benefits, do you feel, of having a diverse workplace? And if we come to Joanne first of all, and if we could just give me a couple each, that would be brilliant to kind of kick off the discussion.
I think we've all seen the stats from McKinsey, et cetera, about the benefits of a diverse workforce. Let's put some humanity into that rather than just facts and figures. One of the core areas you can have when you've got a very tight monoculture is blind spots, homogenous thinking, not spotting opportunities. So that one of the core benefits of a diverse workforce is to be able to catch each other's blind spots, to spot opportunities, to be more innovative in whatever you're doing, and also to be representative of your customer base, because your customer base is diverse. So there's a whole load of good reasons beyond just the pure McKinsey stats, if you like. And it's trying to understand what it means to you as a business and why it makes sense for you to become more representative of society and the clients you serve.
Thank you, Joanne. Harry, do you want to add to that from your perspective?
Absolutely, and I'm going to echo everything that Joanne just mentioned. We're a tech company at Champion Health, and our vision is to have built the Netflix of well-being, where all areas of well-being come into one place. And you talk about Sky Bet with Holly, you'll have such a diverse workforce across Sky Bet. You'll have some people that are able-bodied and some people that have mobility issues, for example. You'll have different ethnicities all the way through to different challenges across the organisation. And if me as a white middle-class male just builds a technology platform and then we say we're going to roll it out and make sure that it's inclusive and accessible to all, it's not going to work. It's not going to be as impactful at the core of it. So in terms of that customer representation, that is absolutely crucial for us as an organisation, but it will be for your organisations no matter what field you're in. So that's really the more of the business angle. And I like to stay away from that, actually. I like to go to the human angle. I don't just want to work with people that are yes people and people that look like me and speak like me. That's not fun as much as anything. We spend a third of our lives at work. I want to spend it with people that are going to enrich my life as well. And I'm going to learn about different cultures, for instance. So I think there's first of all that business angle that we can deliver a better customer service for people. But the second angle is we want to work around people that have different opinions and different perspectives on life. And that to me excites me with the company that we're growing.
Thank you, Harry. That's really insightful. Holly, Anne-Marie, is there anything that you would like to add that Joanne and Harry haven't covered?
No, for me, I think the term that Joanne used was really powerful in terms of blind spots. Absolutely. I think the more that you make sure that your organisation and the senior part of your organisation that sets the tone, that sets the culture, is diverse, then I think you're going to be much more likely to not miss those blind spots. But there is a piece around most organisations are there to make money. Sadly, that is the reality in most organisations. So you also have to talk to that monster and feed that monster, and that monster, ultimately, as you said, consumers are diverse. So actually, spend so much money on voice of the consumer surveys but ultimately make sure that the people that are trying to build the product or build the capability to sell to end consumers are representative. That's the best voice of the consumer. Make sure that you're represented.
Absolutely.
I'd just add as well, in terms of what everyone's been saying, really, we all know the benefits, we've read the reports, but just to bring it to life a little bit, we've had 13 young people start with us this week at Sky Betting and Gaming on our self-funded Kickstart scheme. Some of them have never worked in their life, definitely never worked in kind of the corporate or tech sector. And they've come into meetings and they've just questioned why we're doing things. They don't understand this. Like, this doesn't make sense. That person doesn't look like they know what they're doing. And they're absolutely right. So I think just to bring to life...
You've let them into an exec meeting.
Just to bring to life that fresh perspective, the way they see the world differently, it's so valuable. And we've really started to feel that already, and they're on day 3.
Amazing. Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Holly. So I'm going to pose this to you, Joanne, if that's okay. When does diversity and inclusion need to start within an organisation? Like, at what stage of kind of, I don't know, bringing people into the organisation does the company need to look at this as an issue?
If you look at sort of startups, often startups occur with a breakaway group from an organisation, university friends come together. So there's always already this kind of homogenous affinity group that kicks off a new organisation. And I would say it's really, really important to think about bringing in different voices as early as possible as you can within that cycle. I think it becomes a problem when you get to 50, even above 25 employees or staff. You're already setting the culture of that homogenous, people like us environment. So I would say the earlier you can bring this in, with your first hires, your first senior person joining the team, think about who isn't represented. Think about who you are and who you're not, and then bring people in that you're not, so that you can make sure you get that diversity of thought early on. And I think it's really, really difficult to try and reverse the supertanker once you're already moving. So always, as early as you can, the smaller you are, the more focused you're on this, the better your long-term results will be.
Sure. And obviously, bringing people into the organisation at the recruitment stage is a really important part of the process. What's the first step to improving D&I in the recruitment process?
Is that back to me?
Sorry, Joanne, yeah, back to you.
Yes. I think the first step is to identify that it's something you're concerned about or something you're focused on. Start getting business metrics, sales targets, marketing, what's your ROI? And we can talk about the return on inclusion, the ROI of inclusion. Is that understanding what you're trying to achieve? And we often think about diversity hiring as faith, stroke ethnicity, and gender. We're often, we look at the number of organisations that don't necessarily have a credible disability strategy or an LGBT strategy. And no one ever went out into the world and said we need to hire more trans people, but they are focused on gender, they are focused on race. So it's trying to work out what the end goal is. What's your why? Why do you want to do this? Why does it matter to you? So again, we talked about representation, meeting your customers where they are, et cetera, et cetera. And then when in that recruitment campaign, you can look at your recruitment marketing, look at your employer branding, look at the imagery on their website, look at the stories from your existing people, look at your customer stories, your journeys, creating personas for the type of people you're looking for, and then making sure that the marketing you have aligns with the people you're trying to attract. And it may well be you need to craft different messages. So if you're trying to attract a female audience, you craft it specifically for a female audience. If you're trying to craft for minority, underrepresented groups from different communities, craft the message to them. And I always say the best way to find out what a good message is, the best way to find out what your marketing looks like is go and ask people. So if you're trying to attract people from minority groups, go and ask them, does this sound like you? If you're looking to, maybe if you're big enough, you've got your own staff networks, you can leverage the expertise of your people, your gender group, your LGBT group. What does this job spec look like? What does our brand look like from the outside? Shining that torch up to yourself. Are we attractive to these people? I think we often forget, and we're just churning out the same marketing, branding material without actually thinking about how we're going to target that. So I think in terms of recruitment, in terms of D&I pipeline, having data, having metrics, and thinking about how you're running those campaigns, really, really important. Because if you just do one size fits all, blunderbuss approach, you'll get the usual suspects.
Thanks, John. That's really helpful. I'm writing notes, so I'm going to have to watch this back afterwards and go through it all again. Anne-Marie, I'm going to come on to you now. I shared the stat at the start of the presentation about, according to Tech Nation, only 19% of the tech workforce is made up of females. In your opinion, why do you think that is still a challenge?
I think there's one massive one, which is just around the lack of role models. I think that's really, really important. Everybody wants to look and see someone that's a bit of a reflection of them. So whether that's, you know, female or, you know, or other elements, I think that's in terms of why the workforce is, you know, is quite low in terms of female representation. I think it is role models. I think that sets a massive tone about organisations. And stereotypically in technology, it has been very much, you know, boys are better at science and maths. I think that's changed. I do think, you know, I think that was probably much more the case maybe 20 years ago. I do think now schools are much more promoting that girls actually do go into science and maths and those stem cell degrees. So I think I'm hoping that's shifting. I certainly saw that with both of my daughters, that there was a very strong push at school to positively pull girls into those subjects where traditionally they weren't comfortable. But it's definitely around more role models. And I think, you know, just the dynamic for me of getting more women into the workplace, it creates a different culture in a workplace. It absolutely creates a different culture. You know, my husband laughs. He's the only male in our house. He's got me and 2 daughters and a dog that we even got a female dog. So we totally ruled him out of everything. And just the dynamic is very different. It's a reality. You'll see it in your own family if you go into a house that's, you know, full of boys. So for me, just creating that environment where you may not be able to bring, you know, women in at the top. You can't start at the top. You've got to work your way through. But just trying to get much more of a balance just in the workforce overall creates a different culture. And I think that takes time to foster. But yeah, for me, that's important so that people feel comfortable to develop their careers in an environment that is more representative of them.
Absolutely. And you mentioned about encouraging girls towards STEM subjects, particularly at secondary education. Do you think that's too late?
I think it is, but I can see that that's changing. I can see, because I've got 2 girls that have gone through school, and I do think that is changing. But I also think, again, it's about even children having role models that they aspire to when they're thinking, you know, it's the age-old problem. How do you know what you want to be when you grow up, when you're 10? It's really difficult. But actually they look and they're looking for role models. So for me, you know, some of it absolutely is a responsibility of education and that system and teachers, but it's upon all of us as well to create role models that mean that people are more attracted to careers in those STEM subjects.
Absolutely. I've got some ideas on this as well that I'll maybe share with you afterwards, that I think we can kind of come together and deal. So obviously we know there's a challenge in technology, and attaining workplace diversity, specifically in tech, is elusive for many tech teams. What's causing this, and most importantly, how do we overcome these barriers moving forward? Holly, I'm going to come to you because I know you've been heavily involved with you know, the Sky Betting Gaming being very much a tech organisation. So I'm going to come to you with that question.
I think, like, the word elusive in there is probably right, and the issues that we see in the workplace around inclusion and diversity are multifaceted, they are complex, and we need to kind of remember that our organisations don't just exist in a bubble. Like, we experience the symptoms of society's wider problems. So when it comes to seeing underrepresentation in our organisations, it's to do with things like education, to do with things like poverty, to do with the systemic issues that exist in society around race or gender. So I think, you know, we can't change the world in our organisations, but we can make steps to make the changes that we'd want to see in the wider world. We've got that control within our organisations, but at the same time, I'm a big advocate of kind of taking positive action to help fix some of those issues. So I mentioned the Kickstart scheme that we ran at SBG this year. So we created 13 brand new entry-level roles targeted at underrepresented groups, people who are at risk of long-term unemployment and face barriers to employment. And within those 13 roles, 50% are from ethnic minority backgrounds, 40% were on free school meals, and over 50% have some form of disability, mental health condition or neurodivergent condition. And they're all absolutely brilliant, but would they have walked into a management role at SBG in a few years' time? Probably not. So I think it's about understanding our responsibility as organisations to take steps to fix some of those problems. But interestingly, I was at the Women in Leeds Digital race in Leeds session yesterday. So some research has been done on why we see underrepresentation from an ethnicity perspective in tech. And it's come through that a lot of people who are on the older end of the spectrum are leaving technology when they're from an ethnic minority background, because they face this glass ceiling and the opportunities and progression just isn't there. So I think, as well as looking at how we bring people into the organisation, like the work isn't done there, we've got to look at what are their experiences and that sense of belonging, progression when they're in the organisation as well. And that's hard work, and it takes work to get to that point as well.
Thank you, Holly. Anne-Marie, as a CIO, where building tech team is a big challenge for you, is there anything that you would kind of add to that in terms of how you're addressing that internally at TransUnion? Oh, you're on mute, Anne-Marie.
So the point Holly made is really important. About it is about attracting talent and diverse talent, but it is about the retention piece, and that is as important. So if you've done all the hard work and you've managed to attract a diverse workforce, we need to make sure that there are no barriers to that workforce progressing. So that's really important for me. Just around that attraction piece, I think you need to make sure that whilst it's important to make sure your collateral on your websites is very inclusive, you've also got to make sure that you're actually walking the talk on it as well. Because it is very easy for us all to make sure that we've got diverse pictures and they're on our website, and it all, the veneer looks good. But when someone comes into the organisation to be interviewed, for me, it's important that you make sure that even that interview process in the panel represents the organisation. So you need to make sure that, I think, panels are diverse. You need to make sure that everybody in the organisation, but particularly those involved in any recruitment and talent management activities, truly understand and are fully trained on just unconscious bias, which is really, really important. And make sure that you really do live and breathe the diversity policies that you have in an organisation. Again, it's really easy to produce them. You can probably just very easily pull them down and just script them for your organisation, but you need to make sure that you truly do bring that to life, because that is how you will retain the talent as well. So we've got to make sure that there's depth behind it, not just a veneer.
Thank you. And Joanne, I'm just going to come to you on that finally, if that's okay. Is there anything that you would add? Obviously, seeing quite a breadth of organisations.
I was a party to some stats the other day that shows that we're actually attracting less women into STEM today than we were 5 years ago. for all the reasons we've talked about. And I think one thing that organisations can do, very much like SBG are doing, is in terms of building academies, but recognising with the academy, the people you're going to try and get into that may not have experience and they may not have qualifications. So it's about creating an academy to breed your own future generation of STEM employees, looking for different skills. So you're looking for potential, you're looking for capability, you're looking for all these different soft skills, knowing full well with the people with the right attitude, you can train the technology, you can train the tech skills. And people don't always make the right decisions or the long-term decisions when they're at school, when they're at college, they pick different subjects. But people maybe in their 20s, maybe they've had their first child, they're a young family, maybe at that point they're people from minority or underrepresented groups start to look around. So it's about trying to attract people there. There's people in their 40s, having had a family, they want to get back into something, looking at returners. And again, these people may not have experience, they may not have qualifications in the topics they're looking for. So it's creating this attractive academy program. And I think the most important thing here is pay these people fairly. It's not about trying to expect them to pay their own day release, pay their own college. Employ them on proper money and give them proper training. And that way you'll create loyalty, you'll create sustainability of your, if you want to call it talent pipeline, that sounds, I hate that phrase, talent pipeline, creating a future workforce that are passionate about working for you. And I think that's what I see forward-looking companies doing, creating these academies.
Thank you. I'm going to come on to Harry now. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about mental health in the workplace, and particularly around from a tech perspective. There's some research that suggests mental health in tech is currently in a poor state, and some would go as far as saying it's reaching a crisis point, I guess, particularly coming on the back of as we come out of the pandemic. And I think the report found that 52% of tech workers have suffered from anxiety or depression at some point, which in turn impacts staff retention, loyalty and support. Do you think, Harry, there is still a stigma around mental health in the workplace, or do you think we've kind of started to break that down?
Yeah, I'll come on to the stigma in a moment, but in terms of the statistics that you mentioned, they don't surprise me at all. And again, we're a tech company in mental health, and the number one priority for those tech people to thrive is their mental well-being. We look at what are the symptoms of depression and anxiety. It's a loss of concentration all the way through to irritability, for example, not being able to communicate as effectively. And so for anyone in your organization, not just the tech people, mental health is a top priority. Now, one of the reasons why tech professionals experience an increase in mental health issues, one of the major things is because of the workload that's put upon them. And that's partly down to the issues around there is a dearth in expertise within tech at the moment, and it's very hard to recruit for. We're recruiting at the moment. It's so competitive out there. And so what we need to do as organizations is to recognize that these are human beings. They're building technology, but they're human beings, and we need to respect their workloads. We can't just expect everything yesterday. And that's one of the major things that when we've spoken to tech professionals that are looking to move from somewhere where they're burnt out, they're working 12, 14, 15-hour days to be able to get the projects over the line. They have a short break and then they're going again. That's why we're attracting some of that talent, is because we recognize that we need to put them in control of their working hours for them to do the best possible work. I think there's another angle of neurodiversity that ties into technology as well. And really being able to respect those differences that people have. We have a neurodiverse workforce of technology professionals at Champion Health. And what we do, quite simply, is listen to them. We sit down with them, we speak to them, but we listen. And that is so important when it comes to mental health, but also diversity and inclusion, is that you can hear from them. What are their challenges when it comes to communicating, so you can make those reasonable adjustments going forwards. So that's just some examples of how we make our technology team and department a mentally healthier place to work. Now, there's another angle in terms of the stigma that you mentioned. And there is, without a doubt, still a stigma. And you just need to look at Emma Raducanu, for example. At Wimbledon, you can see the headlines. After she experienced a panic attack, people were describing her as weak within certain papers that I won't name on this event. And then just a few months later, you look at the US Open, for example, and everyone's hailing the resilience that she experiences. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to recognize in society. There is still a stigma, but what we found is companies have come so far across the last 5 years. From when my friend James that I mentioned earlier on in this event took his own life, there was a huge stigma within their organization, and they've gone to huge lengths. I wish they'd done it before, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. Huge lengths to be able to prioritize employee well-being going forward. So I think whilst there is still a stigma, so many organizations are doing a lot about it. And in terms of that stigma, the number one thing to do is to get your senior leadership team, that's me at Champion Health and my colleagues, to look in the mirror to see, are we making this place the best possible place to work for our people? And it does start with senior leadership, and then it filters down. But you need to get your senior leaders to look long and hard in the mirror to say, are we doing everything that we can do to be able to optimize our people and their performance at work? So that's a little bit about the stigma within there.
It's on really nicely actually to my next question. How do we make conversations more, I guess, normal and common in the workplace so that an individual doesn't have to brave an uncomfortable conversation when they're feeling they may be in a more of a vulnerable state?
So a lot of the recruitment process is tailored towards IQ and hiring people that are intelligent, that have certain grades in mathematics or science, for example. Mm-hmm. What we will focus on is EQ, so emotional intelligence. And that's one of the most important things for me as a CEO of our organization, is that we've got people that when the going gets tough, they can have the conversation with the people around them. They can communicate effectively, for example. So I think that's the first thing, is to make sure that we can effectively communicate going forwards. I think in terms of be able to, also, I think another element is sharing stories within the workforce and making sure that people feel open and to be vulnerable if they are struggling. And so that psychological safety is a huge element that's coming into the workplace at the moment. If you haven't heard of psychological safety, please look it up, whether it's Brené Brown on her TED Talks on YouTube. It is so important. And what psychological safety means is I feel safe to make mistakes, for example, and to experiment when it comes to innovation, to bring my whole self to work and not feel like there is that stigma and that judgment within our organizations. And really, psychological safety is going to be one of the main areas that we're going to focus on as global organizations in the next 5 to 10 years. We've had health and safety. We're now looking at psychological safety coming through. So the earlier you can look into that in your organization, the better. And Champion Health have some free to use guides that I can send through to Sarah after this event as well to get you started.
That would be amazing. Obviously, you know, the last 18 months has been tough as hell on everybody. And maybe people that previously haven't experienced mental health challenges are now doing so. I think, you know, stats were saying 20% more people are experiencing mental health challenges in the workplace than before, post-COVID. As an organisation, what support should we be putting in place to support the workforce moving forward?
So I think the first thing to touch upon is what Joanne mentioned in terms of data, to understand the data when it comes to the well-being of our workforce, understanding where the stresses at work come from, but are there home-related stresses such as bereavement all the way through to caring responsibilities within our organisations. Now, when we can start to understand the workforce better, we can make data-driven decisions to benefit the individual. So that's when we can plan initiatives, we can make those reasonable adjustments to those specific areas of the business. So without the data, we can't measure improvement, and we can't then start to plan data-driven interventions. And that's the second element, is not just collecting the data, it's doing something with it. And that's absolutely crucial, that data without meaningful insight and action is almost pointless. So start with the data, and then off the back of that, build your interventions around those specific areas. For example, if you've got a proportion of people that are experiencing a high level of anxiety, for instance, there are various interventions that could be targeted towards that population, but not just looking at individual and self-care within there. Look at the organizational practices as well, because mindfulness is not going to be effective for someone that's being bullied, for instance. And so looking at the organizational change element is crucial, as well as supporting the individual with how can we build their resilience. And so they can cope with the daily demands that life throws at them.
Excellent. Thanks, Harry. I might come back to Joanne in a minute on this. I'm just a little bit mindful of time, but I know Joanne's got something to add to this. If we can come on to Holly now. Holly, people from ethnic minorities account for, as I've shared the stat earlier, 18% of all tech workers in the UK, which falls short of, I guess, being representative of the whole UK population. Why do you think that is happening? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but let's...
Yeah, I was going to say it probably just echoes what I was touching on before. So, like, we can't ignore the wider societal reasons that mean that people haven't had the same opportunities. Like, we simply don't operate on a level playing field. And there's so many interesting documentaries out there around disproportionate effects on young people in schools from an ethnic minority background, of how their papers are marked based on their names, all of those different levels of biases. You'll also see things from like a COVID perspective, how ethnic minority communities have been disproportionately affected from a health perspective. Like, there's so many complex layers that go into this, rather than just tech companies don't recruit properly. I mean, that's probably an element of it, but it's so much more complex than that. And then I think as well, we probably don't do enough to understand and act on the experiences of people of colour in tech. A lot of organisations will have data around gender and be able to monitor things from that perspective, but I would question how many have it from an ethnicity point of view, being able to look at promotions, leaver data, engagement, and understand people's experiences from that point of view to be able to act on it. So I think it's those 2 points coming out again.
Okay, so just leading on to that then, you know, within SBG, you monitor the data to understand why people might be leaving, or why you might be struggling to recruit from, you know, maybe attracting people of colour. What positive action are you taking to address that as an organisation?
Yeah, I think so. You just mentioned we did earlier in the year the SBG census, ripped off the UK census there, to collect all of our employees' data who felt comfortable to share it on a wide range of characteristics going beyond gender, so ethnicity, sexual orientation, whether they're a parent or carer, mental health, neurodivergence, so that we can layer that data over our dashboards that tell us about all different stages of the employee life cycle. So we can look at our recruitment throughput. Are we losing certain groups of people at interview stage versus screening their CVs? Who's getting promoted? Who's leaving the business? And that type of data we now feed into our leadership team on a monthly basis. And I think a lot of organisations, and we've been guilty of this before, we had dedicated resource on inclusion. We just don't look at inclusion problems the same way we do business problems. We don't use data, we don't resource it, we don't get it into the same forums. And I think that's what makes the real difference. So if I can take to our leadership team data that shares that we've got a higher drop-off rate of people from ethnic minority backgrounds in our recruitment process than we do any other different characteristic, like, we can take that data and act on it. Whereas I think a lot of the time inclusion can just be seen as like this nice to do, let's put on an event, and that doesn't drive actual outcomes in terms of making change. All of that stuff is part of it. Like, we need that awareness, we need that engagement, we need the safe spaces for people to learn, but that's not the only way to solve the problem.
Thank you, Holly. We know that people perform better in the workplace when they can be themselves. It's quite a simple concept, isn't it? And I think some may think that there's been so much progress, I guess, for lesbian, gay, bi and trans people over the past decade that it's simply job done. Is that fair to say? And I think the upsetting thing is that we know that's not the case. And we know that there's still a number of young people who avoid STEM-based careers because of negative stereotypes and, I guess, the fear of discrimination. So John, I'm going to come to you. It's quite a generalist question, but what are the main barriers that the LGBTQB plus community face coming into the workplace? And if you could link it to tech, that would be great. But also I appreciate that it's a wider question than that.
Total Jobs republished their LGBTQ plus stroke trans survey earlier this year, which they ran 5 years after the previous one. And disappointingly, even though we think we're a progressive society moving forward, it shows that, for example, trans people are still actually even more reluctant to be open about their identity at work. And it comes back to what Harry was saying about psychological safety. We look at what's going on in the media at the moment. We look at what's going on with the anti-trans rhetoric that we see all the time. It's on the front page of the Times. It's in the Telegraph. We've got the Labour Party debating at a senior level around trans rights. So is it any wonder that trans people feel this lack of psychological safety in society? And as Holly said, business maps society. And we've got these big challenges that trans people certainly feel in the workplace. We've got divisions within the LGBT community. People are pitching each other against each other. So again, that fragments the momentum. And we see what's going on in Hungary, we see what's going on in Poland, we see what's going on in other parts of the world. All this creates this anti-LGBT rhetoric, which becomes pervasive. The Trump era in the States bled into the UK as well, through that far-right Christian type approach, the family values. So I think it's not surprising that trans and LGBT and queer people feel this lack of psychological safety in the world. In terms of tech, I ran an IT company for 25, 30 years. So, but I wasn't out and open in those days. I actually don't know whether tech is any different to any other industry, but I do know that there's a general feeling, if you're certainly trans or queer or gender diverse, there is a real sense of feeling under attack and under threat. I think the same surveys showed that only 30% of companies, when asked, wouldn't employ a trans person. And that rose depending on the industry. So healthcare, fire, police, those stats were higher. The other stat I saw, I think it was a Cross and Solicitors report from a couple of years ago, said that 86% of people in the UK are trans-neutral or trans-positive. So that's a huge thing. So actually, if you look at the media, there's a huge disproportionately misrepresentation of societal views. But that still leaves 16% of the population, or 14% of the population, who are actively anti-trans. That active voice has loud, is powerful, has momentum, it has backing by well-known authors, well-known comedians, well-known MPs, well-known people in the House of Lords. And it gives it oxygen, gives it a voice. So I think that's what's going on in society at the moment. And when I talk to organisations around trans awareness, trans inclusion, it's around being a fantastic corporate ally. What do you stand for as an organisation? Are you trans positive? Are you LGBT positive? Have you got senior leadership? Have you got champions in your organisation? Are you going more than just changing your logo once a year for Pride? What are you really doing? Are you looking at your healthcare provision and making sure that's trans inclusive? Are you looking at making sure you're designing products for customers that are LGBT inclusive? Marks and Spencer did a fantastic job a few years ago with their LGBT sandwich. They put guacamole in their BLTs. And then they missed a trick at Valentine's Day. They had a Colin and Connie cake love nest. What about the Colin and Colin love nest, the Connie and Connie, or the Connie and Colin love nest, for the polyamorous? They missed a trick there. So every time there's a Valentine's Day, every time there's a Father's Day, every time there's a Mother's Day, every time there's a day in the calendar, you find that LGBT people find it really difficult to see representation, to see themselves in the imagery, in the products. So that's what organisations can do through corporate allyship, is make sure that we have representation of visibility in all the product lines, not just a sandwich once a year. So that's a bit of a rant.
No, it's not actually. It's really interesting, particularly changing the company logo every year, which you see a lot of. I'm going to come on to some kind of wrapping up questions now before we can just take some questions from the people that have joined us this morning. Organisations that are still green in the space of D&I need some strategies to get buy-in at C level to really make this a priority, which I know is a challenge. And that's got to go beyond, hasn't it? Just sitting on a training course and, you know, doing all that kind of stuff. What can organisations do to get that buy-in? I know, Anne-Marie, that's something that TransUnion have done a lot of, so I'm going to come to you to take that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of the piece around, you know, sort of shifting at all levels of the organisation, I think it goes back to the earlier point, which is ultimately make sure that you are representing your consumers. That's one trigger that will make the organisation much more successful. But actually make sure that you've got very visible diversity-friendly policies, that you've got communities and champions that are open, that you build a culture where the organisation and people in it are comfortable to be open at whatever level of the organisation they are. For me, ensure that you deal with bias, even if it's unconscious bias, but deal with it really quickly. Don't let it go unchallenged, because that can just be toxic in an organisation. If you allow bias to get oxygen, then it will. And I think it's really important that we should all be really comfortable to tackle that head on when we see that. And I think there's then a piece about creating a culture in an organisation at all levels to make sure that it's going back to the sort of EQ part of making sure that you're talking openly about who you are as a person. When you're at work, talk about not just the person that they see coming into work or see on Teams that, you know, might be suited and booted, and people then have almost a stereotype of who you are, but actually creating a culture where people talk about who they really are, who they are outside of work. You know, the fact that, you know, that your best friend is gay, my hairdresser of 20 years is transgender, and just create a safe place where people feel really comfortable to have those conversations, but actually do get to know you, not just the person they believe you are, because that in itself can just create stereotypes of who they believe people are in an organisation. So be comfortable to open up. And I think that then breeds conversations where people are much more comfortable to bring their true self to work.
Do you think the problem lies that lots of people are uncomfortable talking about diversity and inclusion because they don't understand it, and there's a fear factor of saying the wrong thing and using the wrong terminology or the wrong words?
Absolutely.
Offending somebody, maybe?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a massive part of it. So we have champions and we have communities at LGBTQ plus who actually come and talk at our all hands. We run open house sessions and it is about that, for people to be comfortable. I think there is a massive piece where people genuinely don't want to get it wrong, so actually they don't say anything because they're worried about getting it wrong. So actually, you know, having people that are comfortable to have those conversations with, I think builds that confidence over time. But yeah, for me, I would go back to the bias piece and making sure that as an organisation that is always kept in check, because you will see snippets of it. In any organisation, you absolutely will. And I think making sure that it's very visible, that you challenge that bias, and make sure you eliminate it.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Just to wrap up with one question, I've had some questions emailed into me as well today from a couple of people that couldn't attend. What practical tips can you share today to help an organisation at the very start of their D&I journey? Maybe somebody who has got that fear factor of getting it wrong. I'm going to come to you, Harry, first with that one, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm going to touch upon the mental health angle when it comes to D&I. And I think the first thing is, as I mentioned earlier, share your story if you feel comfortable to and you have a story. The CEO of Lloyds shared his story, and I've had friends that work at Lloyds now that feel comfortable in opening up to their line management, and it permits that layer of psychological safety that myself and Joanne have mentioned. I think the second thing is, I mentioned looking in the mirror. I think that's really important, that we honestly look in the mirror and say, are we doing everything that we possibly can? Holly is absolutely right that there are societal issues that I can't control as a CEO, but there are things that I can control within my organization. I know how I want to run my organization. I think looking in the mirror and saying, am I doing everything that I possibly can? And if the answer is yes, I'm very proud to be running this organization. And I think the final thing really is around that psychological safety element, that if you haven't looked up psychological safety, please do. It makes complete sense from every angle, from your sales, marketing team through to innovation. We need to really build those cultures of psychological safety where people feel open to be vulnerable and bring their whole self to work. So they're the 3 practical tips that I would encourage you to take away from today's session.
Thank you. How do you share your story? How does a CEO that's maybe experienced some mental health challenges share their story? How do they do that? What's the right forum?
So the forum is the most
authentic and, you know,
authentic forum. That's exactly what I was going to say. So, for example, my co-founder is going to send a message out to the team in a few days' time, and it's something that he's mentioned to me that he's been struggling with. And the most comfortable forum for him was via email, because he didn't feel comfortable talking to the team. And so that worked really well for him. And I can't wait for the team to be able to understand what he's experiencing at the moment, because that's that psychological safety we talk about. For other people, it might be on a morning call or through a WhatsApp message, but just as long as it's authentic, that is the most important thing. It's not necessarily the method of how you do it. If you're the CEO, it may be a video to all employees that's just recorded as you're walking through the park, for example, but make sure it's authentic. That is the number one thing. And that will just come through in that message, no matter what media form you send it through.
Thank you, Harry. That's really helpful. Joanne, is there anything that you would like to add to that in terms of for those companies at the very, very beginning of their journey?
I would always say focus on the leadership tier or tiers. Ensure that you train your leaders to be leaders. And we talked about EQ. There's also cultural intelligence, CQ. Give leaders the tools, because often in STEM and technology, we see leaders promoted because they're great technicians, they're great technical artists, if you like. And that isn't always the same as being a great leader. I think what you can do is you can have a huge influence on your organization by training your leaders or recruiting professional leaders in the first place, and give us a different route for technical skills to succeed in your organization without it necessarily being through leadership. So I think that is the crucial thing, whether that was what Harry said about psychological safety, EQ, and no doubt what Holly or Anne-Marie are going to say. It's by investing in your leadership level will pay dividends long term.
Thank you. I had a question on that this morning, actually, from a friend of mine who runs a startup, and they have very little budget to attribute to training and development, but they want to make sure that they're recruiting, retaining a diverse team. And obviously lots of companies in startup mode don't have budget to attribute to this. Are there some good free resources online as a starting point for an organization that might not be able to employ, a consultant or trainer to come in and help with this?
For sure. I mean, YouTube is a massive resource. LinkedIn, if you look on LinkedIn Learning, there's massive amounts of free content on LinkedIn Learning. Mm-hmm. And you could, as a leadership tier, select a handful of D&I related training modules, normally half an hour to an hour each, and you all take the same ones over the course of a month, and then you talk and review and then find more. So yes, follow people on Twitter, follow people on LinkedIn. I always say this, that if you find influencers, if you find people who are vocal in the D&I space, organizations, there's a lot of learning out there. And if you're nervous about talking about the menopause, put the hashtag into LinkedIn, you'll find people talking about this, creating resources. So I think, yes, follow the hashtags, spend some time on LinkedIn, spend some time on YouTube. There's a lot of free stuff out there. And then once you have the budget, pay your professionals fairly and well, because many of us, we have to earn a living as well as a D&I professional. And asking people to share their lived experience or educate you for free is not fair either. So in the same way you can't afford it, I'm sure they can't either. So yeah, but do look at LinkedIn, and there's a lot of LinkedIn resources out there that are worth looking at. There's some brilliant content on your website as well, Joanne, that I'll share afterwards. So I've got a huge podcast library now.
I've got a couple more questions, but I'll just put it out to the kind of people attending today, whether if you've got any questions, then pop them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Otherwise, I'll come on to these. So I'll leave it for a second. Let me come back to it. I've got a bit of a provocative question here from somebody. I'm going to ask it. Are white men the biggest issue when it comes to tackling the issue of diversity, inclusion and equity in the workplace? Anybody want to volunteer to take that one? I thought you might, John. Go on.
My view is that white men aren't actively involved enough. That is the challenge. I think that white men have become scared to engage because they feel out of their depth. They feel that they've become the problem and they don't want to echo their voice. And I think we fall into this trap of perceiving visually. So you look white, therefore you have no relevance on this topic. So we need to see beneath appearance, look into the heart of people. And I think I always talk about privilege. When you have privilege, you have the responsibility to open the door and to allow people to speak, to create platforms. And if the white man barricades himself in the castle, nobody can get in. So we need to create dialogue, we need to create conversations to enable change. And you need to engage with the majority or the default or the privilege in order to get change. And I think as much as I dislike the phrase, women were given the vote by men 100 and so years ago. If we wanted to make change in society today, men, white men, straight men, able-bodied men need to enable that change and have those conversations. So I say, where are the white men in D&I conversations?
Thank you, John. Excellent. Well, if we haven't got any more questions, I think we can wrap up the session this morning. I know everyone's time is very, very valuable, and I really, really appreciate you all joining the panel and sharing. I think we've covered such a broad range of topics, which is hard to do in an hour. But I think hopefully we've got some really practical and useful insights for people. This will be shared on our YouTube channel, and we'll share it across social media as well, so that this is hopefully a resource and free online learning tool that people can tap into as a starting point for their future plans. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this morning, and a big thank you to Holly, Joanne, Anne-Marie and Harry for your brilliant contribution. I really, really, really appreciate your time.